I'm going to be doing what is probably going to end up being a fairly long video on some of my dad's race cars, and I just thought that I found a few pictures of his last car with the last turbo 4-cylinder that I put in for him. I thought I'd show you some of these pictures. After this is up, the next clip that's going to be shown is this fall. Is actually the same night as Hurricane Sandy, which we didn't get much anything other than just some heavy rain. But I was at my mother's house repairing her hot water heater, and I thought while I was there I'd take some film footage of the Pinto in its current state. It sat in the corner of her garage for the past 10 years since he passed away. He died 10 years ago, beginning of February, and actually since I took that film footage or video footage, she has actually sold that car. Somebody in Ohio bought it, so I just thought I'd show some of what's going on here. This is put the 4-cylinder in here, kind of fitting a few things up. You see in that corner right there, that's actually the starts of a water injection system that I designed for this car. Okay. Next one up, getting a little bit closer to being ready to run it. Got the intake manifold and some other stuff on. This particular engine was based on the 79 to, I think it was 79 they first put them in, 79 to 81 carbureted turbo 2.3 liter Ford 4-cylinder, and of course they come with a 2-barrel Holley Weber carburetor. And I built a little adapter to put a 390 Holley on it, and we actually did do some modifications to that Holley Weber carburetor. I still have that somewhere in one of my totes, and it worked almost as good as what the 390 Holley did. It wasn't that bad of a carburetor, really. But and here's a picture. We had actually several intake manifolds, and I have one here before and after, before I ported it and after I ported it. And actually I was using a later D-port head on this 2.3, and at the time I didn't have a TIG welder, so we took it to another guy, had him weld up the port floor. I don't seem to have a picture of that, but we welded up the port floor on the intake manifold and blended that into where it would match the floor on the D-port head. The D-port head seemed to be a little bit better of a head. There's a little bit closer picture of what's going on there now with the carburetor on it. You can see that little tank there for the water injection. I had a couple solenoid, actually made it a 2-stage, had a couple solenoid valves with pressure switches on them. I had them, I can't remember what pressures I had them set at, but there was one that was fairly low boost pressure, say 5 psi, and then maybe at 15 another nozzle kicked in. Back that up a little bit. There's another picture, just basically a different view of what was already there. And here's a front view of the engine. This car actually ran pretty good. It was kind of surprising how well that 4-cylinder ran, but it was very touchy. A very small change in weather conditions, and we would just annihilate the head gasket at, say, I think we went as high as 20 pounds of boost, but found at 15 that was where it was pretty reliable. But any more than 15 pounds of boost, weather would just change slightly and it would just annihilate the head gasket. And when we put the 347 in it, the last year that he raced, I had to build some subframe connectors to stiffen it up a little bit, and that's what picture this is. I actually ran them parallel with the rocker panels, and actually welded, I'm trying to remember from memory, this was probably about 2001 or 2002. I welded this, I believe, to the box where the leaf spring mounts, and then I can't remember where I mounted the front part. There was another, like a cross member or something, I welded it to that. And here's a rear view of that car at that time. I think here I was probably putting the gears in it. We ended up, and actually this car was sold with, my mother didn't even know this, and she sold it while I was working all these hours, so I didn't even know she was selling it. But whoever bought this, if you see this video, that 9-inch rear end in the back's got a full spool, and I believe 411 gears if I remember right. So keep that in mind. And actually that 9-inch rear end was out of a, I can't remember what year, 57 Ford maybe, one of the first years they put a 9-inch in. It was one of the most narrow 9 inches they had. But I don't know, I just thought I'd show that before, and to give you a little bit of context on the video you're going to see next. Like I said, I was repairing our hot water heater at the time, so you'll hear me referencing going down and checking to see if things are drained and whatever else. Well, that's what that whole thing was about. So the next part will come up here in a second. Oh, while I'm letting that drain out, I might as well take you a little bit of a tour of my dad's last race car. You can barely see it with all the junk stacked on it now. Like I said, I don't know where my mother's got all this stuff, but 72 Pinto. Now the tires that are on this side are just old junk tires I put on there. I took the regular slicks that were on it off and the regular front runners off, and they're at my house. They don't get all rotted. But had this car, bought this car originally in Texas. We moved to Texas for a year back in the late 70s, 1978 actually, and he saw an ad for this car. At the time it had a really nice flame paint job on it and a ground effects kit. It actually came from a guy who, I'm not sure, I was only 10 years old at the time. I think he was either an executive at Harwood Fiberglass, or he was just plain an employee at Harwood Fiberglass. But they were developing a ground effects kit back then for these cars, and I think this was actually the first one, and they decided to go in a different direction. I'm not sure if they ever did offer a ground effects kit for these cars or not, but we actually, when we bought this car, we actually got the molds for that ground effects kit, and unfortunately I think at some point in the past 30-some years, Dad must have thrown those molds away. I'm not sure why, but they're probably in the way. But I tried to find a picture of this car in its original state upstairs, but to tell you the truth, the upstairs looks about as bad as the downstairs does anymore. I don't know what texture. I think my mother's starting to get into early stages of Alzheimer's or something, and she just buys and buys and buys and buys, and none of this stuff she's ever going to use. But anyways, this originally was a turbocharged 2-liter engine. Well, not originally from the factory, but that's what we originally built for, was a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder. Raced it a few times at Green Valley Raceway Park outside of Dallas, and then we moved back to up north. He sold this car to some relatives, and they beat the heck out of it, and the paint job all fell off and the whole works, and about 8 or 9 years later we got it back. And at that time, he put a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder in it, turbocharged, that he raced for a while, and then kind of got out of it. And then the last 3 or 4 years that he was alive, we built another 2.3 liter 4-cylinder that he raced that ran pretty good. It ran, I think, 770s in the 8th mile, if I remember right. And then the last year that he raced, the year before he died, I built a mild 347 stroker for this car. But it's actually still in pretty decent shape. The car is. It's kind of hard to see. It's awful dark, but the car itself's in really decent shape. Some of this wiring and stuff was kind of, we knew he didn't have much time left and he wanted to race, so it was kind of just thrown together as quickly as possible. But believe it or not, the last time he raced this car, he actually won, so basically I guess you could say he won out a winner. See right there, that is not a mount for a nitrous bottle. That was for his oxygen bottle. He never smoked. Well, he did smoke when he was a teenager, but he had lupus and that destroyed his lungs. So basically he was racing with an oxygen bottle strapped to the floor, and built a nice little fuel cell for him and battery box and all the works, and he got to race one more year before he died. But I'm not sure what we're ever going to do with this car. It's been sitting in this same spot ever since he did die. I really don't have the money to do anything with it or the time. But it's pretty amazing. I mean, listen to this door shut. I mean, this car is in pretty doggone good shape overall. But I don't know what we're going to do with it. I know my mother's wanted it out of here a few times and then decided that she didn't, and whatever. But just thought I'd show you that a little bit. And that was the toolbox that he always carried with him whenever we went racing. He's had that since probably 1971, somewhere in there. And back in here, where this mess wasn't here before, but this is where we did a lot of the engine building work. And actually the workbench that is sitting on, that toolbox, I actually built that, probably about 1986, and that's where I rebuilt carburetors for probably 10 years, 4 or 5 a week for 10 years, and that's where I financed most of my racing back then. Although it's pretty much just going to crap now, but well, time moves on, I guess. But a lot of this garbage wasn't here before. This workbench was all nice and clear, and you could build stuff on it. We had engine stands, and then this workbench here, same thing. There was a bunch of junk on here. And actually, some of this is woodworking equipment. Towards the last couple of years he was alive, he got into woodworking too. So that's why some of this stuff is on here. But back when we were building cars, this here would be the transmission bench and rear end bench. Somewhere in there there's actually I'll never be able to see it, but there's actually a hole drilled where we could take a C4 automatic transmission, stand it up, and put it together, which makes things a lot easier. But well, I better get back to draining this thing. Well, here's a picture of the Pinto at the drag strip. This was one of the times when he had the turbo 4-cylinder, and I think this was in the early 90s, probably about 1990, 1991. He had some pretty small slicks on it back then. He ended up having to get some bigger tires, but that's what he was using at the time. The car wasn't making a whole lot of power. This might have been the time that he decided to try and run it without a turbocharger by the looks of it. But just thought I'd show that. And there he is right there at the races with, you can see, turbo 4-cylinder in it with my two boys, and they were pretty small. This was probably a couple of years before he died. You can see the car has the small tires on it now that it has down in the basement. Those aren't the ones he was using with a 347. And actually, I think if I remember right, he got a little bit bigger set of slicks, like 26 by 10s maybe, that he used whenever he put a 4-speed in this car when it started to run really good. These tires just were too small and couldn't get good traction. There's another picture of the car at the strip with the turbo 4-cylinder in it. That little piece of, big piece of PVC pipe there on the driver's side mounted to the inner fender, that was the water injection system that I designed for him. Worked pretty good, but you had to be careful. Sometimes it would drown it out a little bit. But pump the boost up and get that thing going, and man, she would really fly for a 4-cylinder back then anyways. Here's a couple of the more conventional cars that he raced. This would have been probably about 1974. It's a Comet with 289. Ran that for probably 2, maybe 3 years, but the car was too heavy to be anyways competitive. So the next car he went to was that. Yeah, flame paint job and all. 62 Falcon. High revving 289, 8,000 RPMs. See the thing coming off the line, wheels in the air. That was a neat little car. He only raced that a couple of years too. If you notice, it's got a straight axle in it. Not sure why you'd have done that in 1976, but that's what he had. And actually, I guess he was running a gasser class with it, so straight axle was mandatory. That's why he had it. But just had that car for a couple of years too. I tried to find some of the photo albums of some of the other cars that he had. He had a V8 station wagon Pinto also that ran pretty good. And then also the early pictures of the Pinto with the flame paint job on it, the whole works, back in 1978, but I can't seem to find any of that. And to tell you the truth, the mess upstairs is about as bad as downstairs, so I'm not going to spend too much time looking for it. These were hanging on the wall, so I figured I'd show them.